Today I have with me Dr. Umesh Jain, and we're going to discuss internet addiction and ADHD. I saw him speak at the CADRA conference this year in Montreal, Quebec, in Canada, and it really intrigued me the correlation with internet addiction and the tendencies of the ADHD entrepreneur. Dr. Jain, thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
You are a child adolescent psychiatrist, and you had research interests in impulse disorders, just like ADHD. Is there anything else where you give a brief intro about yourself, please?
Well, I went to medical school here in Canada, went to the United States at the University of Pittsburgh at Western Psych to do some of my residency and fellowship. Came back to Canada to do a little bit of clinical practice, hated it, and then became a researcher at back then, the Clark Institute of Psychiatry, then changed to the Center for Addiction and Mental Health for 27 years, as well as Sick Kids Hospital. And my specialty area in my research was actually adult ADHD. I ran the first research-based adult program in Canada. At that time, there was nobody else. This was back in 1996. And in 1994, the DSM-4 had just come out and had now introduced adult ADHD. And as for folks will remember, in 1989, the first evidence to show that children with ADHD continue on to adults was in a book written by Lily Heckman and Gabrielle Weiss in 1989 called ADHD Children Grown Up. And that was the first evidence to show that this is not something that goes away. Two other studies came out subsequently, and because of that strength of information, the DSM-4 people had to put in something about ADHD in adults, but it was a crappy effort. They just added an addition to the existing criteria.
Yeah.
So they said, you have to have problems at school, at play, and at work. They just added a word, like there was no field trials or anything like that. So there was a lot of confusion about adult ADHD back in 1996. I was as confused as everybody else. And when I was asked to, look at adults with ADHD, my first reaction was, what the hell is this? I don't know what this is. I don't know what's going on here. And so because I was doing research in this area, it was necessary for me to actually figure it out. And so back then, my mentor, my supervisor, Bruce Ferguson, said, well, maybe you should get a bunch of people together and figure out what this is, actually to sort of construct diagnostic criteria. And so he connected me to Lily Heckman, who was a friend of mine at that time. She was the head of the department at McGill. And Lily was also the scientific head of the American Academy of Child Psychiatry. And she pulled together every researcher in adult ADHD in North America. And basically every 2 weeks, we sat on a conference call and fought. That's basically all we did. So, I didn't fight. I was a low-level assistant professor sitting in my office going, please, buddy, this is like people having personality problems and yelling at each other.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there with Jim McGough or Margaret Weiss. All of us were junior researchers, and we were saying, hold on, what do we say? Do we say anything? I don't think we should say anything. I said, no, we shouldn't say anything because they're fighting. So they used Russell Barkley and Denny Cantwell and Joe Biederman and every name that you've ever heard of. Every big person was on that line, about 20 people. And I'm just sitting there going, I guess I'm an adult ADHD specialist all of a sudden, because in my association with that group basically made me the adult ADHD guy in Canada. And so for 27 years, I ran that clinic and also started CADRA, which you're familiar with. And so that was also sort of fell into that.
Because, and CADRA is the Canadian Alliance. Can you repeat that just for everyone?
The Canadian ADHD Resource Alliance.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those situations where Lily Heckman, yet again, and Rosemary Tanek, the three of us, basically said, well, we should do something. And so they, in some surreptitious way, made me the president. And I basically pulled this together and created this organization, everything about it. And I wrote the first guidelines for ADHD for the country. And it was a good group. We had a very collegial group of people that got along very well, and we were very committed to this project. We hired good staff. The first executive director was actually my research coordinator at CAMH, and she started Kadak,
Heidi Heidelman?
Heidi Bernhardt.
Bernhardt, yeah.
Heidi. And so a very entrepreneurial, very bright woman who was able to sort of be the executive director for Cadre, as well as take on the responsibilities for Kadak. And the beauty of it was that she knew what the frontline people, parents were saying. And it was our job as researchers and educators to actually create guidelines that addressed the concerns the parents had. So it was a direct pipeline to us, and we could write these guidelines in a way that allowed people to have practical utility, even when there wasn't a scientific argument because there was no literature. We as a group came up with an answer because people wanted to know. And so in many ways, it was the user-friendly nature of the guidelines that spread wildfire across the world. And I can fairly say 20 years later, and this summer is the 20th anniversary, it is the most widely used guidelines anywhere because of its practicality, because of its utility, and so on. So, you know, I feel good about the fact starting something that has great airplay. But in many ways, my career path has been adults with ADHD, and my research background and that whole process has been really trying to understand the personality development and the issues of impulse control in this population. But impulsivity spills over to all these other areas of impulsiveness, including internet addiction, including bulimia, including just why do humans do stupid stuff, basically.
So is internet addiction one of those human stupidities?
Yeah, it's basically, you know, you're spending all your money, you're going to lose it all. Why are you doing this?
Right.
Because the part of me that wins feels so good that I'm willing to forego all the negative background feedback that says I'm losing to keep wanting that feeling again. If you understand gambling, you understand internet addiction. In fact, the nomenclature, the diagnostic criteria is exactly from the gambling literature. So if you take the DSM criteria for gambling and you look at the internet addiction, it's the parallel is there. And that was a research done by a person named Young, and she did studies back then showing that the overlap had the same salient features. In fact, if you really want to get really weird about this, gambling is exactly the same as fishing. That's why people with ADHD like to fish.
That's why that piqued my interest when you talked about that at the conference. Please spend time on that.
So if I'm sitting in a boat at 3 a.m. with a pouring rain, why am I doing this? Well, because the last time I caught a fish and it comes, I know you're there. The randomness of that excitement is so intense that I'm willing to forego all of the pain and frustration and misery of sitting in a boat waiting for the next one. It's exactly the same as gambling. The intensity of the win is so strong, it makes my brain feel so excitable that I'm willing to forego all the negative feelings that come to allow me to partake in this thing. So that's what gambling does. Everybody wins in gambling. Anyone who plays slots will win in 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, you will always win something because it's geared that way. But it is enough of an excitement that grabs you, but at the end of the day, you lose all your money. People with ADHD are activated by that feeling of excitement. The go signal becomes so strong, so activated, it blinds them to every no signal that says, don't do it. And therein lies the basic construct of ADHD. You need to be able to say, don't do it. The circuit that goes from your prefrontal cortex down to your hand or to your mouth that says, don't do it, ain't working. It's not going fast enough. That's what medications do. They make that circuit go faster. But if your brain is excited with the I want to touch this, and your brain says, don't do it, and the voice is too small, well, the go is going to win. And therein lies the problem of addiction. So at the end of the day, you trigger the go signal strong enough, the stop signal doesn't have a chance.
So is the internet addiction, there's a correlation with the gambling addiction and internet addiction. Is there a difference? Is like internet's a lot more accessible to us. So is that we got more an ADHD person, we're more prone to being addicted to the internet than gambling?
They're parallels. I mean, so it's not surprising that that patients with ADHD or impulse control issues in general have a higher risk of gambling as well as other kinds of addictions. So at the end of the day,
Right.
they're looking for anything that gives them excitement. So they're not looking for alcohol. They're looking for amphetamines. They're looking for cannabis. They're looking for cocaine. They're looking for anything that activates my brain to excitement. I'm going to go for. I'm looking at sex. I'm looking for pornography. I'm looking for spending money. I'm looking for shopping. I'm looking for gambling. They're all the same.
Right. And is that a lot to do with the executive functioning deficits as well and dopamine chasing?
Yeah. You walk around with a credit card that says I can spend, but I don't see the fact that I'm gonna big debt situation. And so at the end of the day, it feels bad after I spend. The go signal says, I like this, I want to buy it. The stop signal says, don't do it. And therein lies the issue. I can't say no. The inability to say no is what drives impulse control.
Right. So at the beginning, we kind of made the comment that humans do stupid things.
Yep.
I don't think it's intended. We're not intending it to be that the person is stupid or dumb.
Nope.
Why is the person not stupid or dumb in this case when we're dealing with addiction?
Well, I mean, it goes to the argument of, willpower, doesn't it? It goes to the idea that if you had enough willpower, you should be able to stop what you know is a detrimental and destructive force. I mean, you're basically blowing off all your money and destroying your family. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Well, because the go signal is that strong. Is that strong that I can't stop? I can't suppress the go signal effectively. So it's not surprising either I replace the go signal with fishing. And in fact, Korean researchers have replaced gambling with internet addiction, which seems to be a safer way of being able to waste your time, but not your money. But the reality is that if you don't replace it with something else that gives you the same kind of feeling, then the only other option is to say no to it. Or in other words, enhance or strengthen the ability to say no. I could do it through significant consequence. I could make the voice of the word no louder by creating so much negative energy, put you in jail, blah, 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 that you say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to get in trouble. But the reality is it's not that successful. I mean, the time basically makes that signal become weak. So scaring you into submission isn't going to solve this problem. Therein lies why medications have been so successful, because it actually fundamentally takes the dopamine channel, which is what drives the no signal, it makes that signal stronger. So with medications, you got a fighting chance of being able to say, yeah, I shouldn't do this.
Right. So is there a relationship? So we got substance addiction and then internet/gambling addiction here. Are they the same type of scenario, or are they two different things?
Well, they have commonalities. The variances, of course, are related to the actual specific event.
Okay.
I mean, pornography would be seen as an addiction for the same purpose. Shopping would be seen, compulsive shopping would be seen in the same kind of context. Ultimately, it's, I know I shouldn't do it. I know it's destructive behavior, but I can't stop myself. I know I shouldn't eat these 15 donuts, but I can't stop myself. Bulimia. I shouldn't do it, but I can't stop myself.
I had a good friend of mine come on the podcast where we were talking about our high functioning alcoholic experience. And one thing he was saying is drinking is not a drinking problem, it's a thinking problem. And a lot of addictions I've seen and observed and I've been reading is it's more of a thinking problem, that we're running away from a problem. So internet addiction and gambling addiction, could that fall in the same line? Could be another problem versus just our executive dysfunction, or
typically what happens if you're smart enough, and people who are bright and who have ADHD, they will find compensatory strategies. They will use anxiety as a coping strategy, which starts out very young in life, typically in grade school and all the way through. So when my brain is constantly challenged with people on the outside constantly berating you by, say, talking in class, part of you starts going, I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to talk. And where does that message come from? Anxiety, because the anxiety says, don't do it, you're going to get in trouble. So anxiety becomes the compensatory force that deals with impulse control. The problem is Anxiety can be as big a problem as the impulsivity, which is one of the reasons why ADHD was felt to be a adolescent burnout syndrome. It is not an adolescent burnout syndrome. It's just replaced by anxiety and depression. So by the time you become an adult, it's anxiety and depression that becomes the bigger problem, because that's what you are using as a coping strategy. Having said that, if anxiety and depression is your coping strategy and I give you alcohol, which takes away your anxiety, padoom, you're going to be really impulsive. So one of the major dangers for people who have impulsivity and concurrent anxiety is you better not drink alcohol, because that will take away, which is ostensibly your coping strategy. It's going to swing you over to even more impulsiveness because you're taking away the thing that stops you. So at the end of the day, do I want you to be a miserable person with anxiety? No. I want you to learn how to cope with anxiety, but at the same time, I need you to structure your life and create controls over your impulsivity. If you controlled your impulsiveness, the anxiety wouldn't be there in the first place, because it's only there because you're not able to control yourself. So control your impulsivity, anxiety goes away.
Okay, that's a lot. So a couple of things I kind of heard there. So anxiety is related to impulsivity?
Yep.
Shit, that's huge. Okay. I want the listeners to kind of sit with that for a little bit and contemplate
let
this episode.
Let me actually make this very easy.
But the next thing, because of that, like you were saying, anxiety it was a coping strategy from our past, which later we may have replaced it with alcohol. But if I say
we self-medicate with alcohol,
right? Which understood was we kind of control our impulsivity a little bit. But if we say no more alcohol and we don't replace that, now it goes back to anxiety, don't deal with the anxiety, then our impulsivity increases, which could be going down another road for substance addiction or gambling or internet.
Yes, no, but let me clarify in a much more simplistic way. If I drew a line, divided that line in half, you'd have heard of that line in 1957 by someone named Eysenck, who said the world could be divided in half and coined the terms extroverts and introverts. But you could have easily said Republicans, Democrats, yin, yang, left, right, liberals, conservatives, head, heart, makes no difference. The world divides in half. We are all born on that line. Our destiny is always to find the path to balance, the middle. We're all looking for center. We psychiatrists get involved if you're stuck out here. If you're stuck at the edges and not finding the path to the middle, then we put labels on you. So if I have my face is the middle and I go that way, let's call that the extroverted side, the child who is social, gregarious, externalizing, happy-go-lucky, full of energy. Well, way over there are disorders that we've talked about are impulse-based: ADHD, bipolar, gambling addictions, the personality developments of narcissism, borderline, histrionic, antisocial. These are all people who act like kids, do stuff they know they shouldn't, but they can't stop themselves. They live from their heart. Let's go that way. This is the head side. The head side, the internalizing side, the analytical side, the thinking side. These are people who as children would have been shy, quiet, daydreaming, social, but more internalizing. Way over there are people who think too much. Anorexia nervosa, social phobia, panic disorder, OCD, depression. These are all people who think too much. Well, if you're born here, I know you're going to end up likely with those conditions if the situation, the genetics is working in your favor. If you were born here, I know that you're likely to go in that direction if the circumstances, genetics are in your favor. Here's the difference, though. These people, because if they're smart enough, know they shouldn't act like that, they learn how to be anxious to stop their impulsiveness, and they now have the double whammy. On the one hand, they're impulsive. On the other hand, they're anxious. Oh, my God. So what do you do when you have the double whammy? Well, if you drink alcohol, which goes that way, I make you more impulsive. If I have impulsiveness, I self-medicate with things that make me go that way.
So back to the other side.
Nicotine, they go that way. Guess what happens if you take too much of this stuff? It makes you anxious. So at the end of the day, people have to handle both sides of that equation.
To balance it out.
If you dealt with the impulsiveness, then the anxiety, which is compensating for the impulsiveness, actually starts getting better. but deal with the impulsiveness. So when we give you stimulant medications, which go that way, guess what? I make you closer to the middle and I take away your anxiety. If the anxiety is big enough, I could make you more anxious. So sometimes I have to give you things like antidepressants to help compensate for the anxiety problem which you've been growing up with. It's not surprising. A lot of adult patients are being treated at both ends. So at the end of the day, that was my research actually. At the end of the day, it's really all about the fact of finding balance. It's all about finding balance. Now, here's the kicker. I don't want you to become here. I'm not interested in making you normal. Normal is boring. Yeah. I'm interested in getting you out of the danger zone. I'm interested in getting you to here.
Right.
Because if I get you to here off the edge of a cliff, what you can do as an ADHD person is amazing. The problem is you're just one step away from falling off the cliff. Right. That's what entrepreneurs and people with success do. If they live at the edge of the cliff and are able to compensate and learn structured routine, self-esteem, and they don't fall off the edge of the cliff, they become amazing. Okay, they can do amazing things. But therein lies the issue. You're one step away from falling off the edge of a cliff. You better figure it out.
Yeah, and that's what I teach with my clients and talk to the listeners about is about, your strengths can become weaknesses. So if we manage our strengths, and they can't become impairments, or I prefer the word impairment, but being too close to that edge too can be dangerous. So I really like that analogy. We want to balance, not normalize, just to balance.
Well, being close. Well, being close to the edge is important, but it can be distressing to everybody else around you who sees you at the edge because they think you're going to fall off.
Correct. Agreed.
So there's your mom over here who's yelling at you, saying, "Get away from the edge of the cliff, for God's sake!" Yeah. And of course, Dad, who's like you, says, "Oh no, let Johnny walk the edge of the cliff. It's okay." But the bottom line really is, I don't want you to be normal. I'm not asking you to be stepping away from the cliff. I want you to know where the edge of the cliff is. That's a major component of adult ADHD or ADHD in general. Teach the person how to have coping strategies and have learning skill sets that allow them to be highly functional, but be aware of the dangers that get them to the point where they fall off the cliff. Yeah. So at the end of the day, if you can live at the edge of a cliff, you can do amazing things.
And that's why I say, make sure it's your measuring stick that you're using, not someone else's, which is, I find is a lot of the issues we have with the world is we're not normal. It's someone else's measuring stick.
But to qualify what you're saying, sometimes you need feedback because you can't see yourself. You can't see you. I can't
agreed.
see myself.
Agreed.
So sometimes you need someone that can give you feedback. The bigger question is, to be functional in this world, to have the maximum success, you need to trust people and supportive networks around you that allow you to understand, not only do I want to be at the edge of the cliff, I want people to appreciate where the edge is and let me do my thing, but I also respect you enough that if you think I'm over the line, you better tell me and I will respect you and get away from the edge.
Right. But when my referral to the measuring stick is, make sure, even if you get the feedback, you're still comparing to your stick, not someone forcing their measuring stick on you, was my preference.
But therein lies the issue regarding the people that you trust. They're not trying to mold you into something that like them. They're trying to assist you and be the maximum person you can be. One of the major things about having somebody with adult ADHD, one of the reasons that they can be successful, one of the components of success is finding the right partner. In other words, in business, if you have a good CEO, CFO, or somebody that is basically tempering your capacities, that's the best. That's the best partnership. Similarly, in a spousal relationship,
that's a great conversation for another. Yeah, for another episode, we discussed a lot. We're talking about the addiction here, the internet addiction, and how the entrepreneur can avoid that, or have what kind of recommendations can you have for them to avoid or reduce? Because the other thing you said too was the rate of internet addiction is related to the broadband width available.
Yeah, so if you increase broadband width, the rate of addictions goes up because the information comes out faster. Therefore, your excitability becomes even stronger. just to take one step back from what you're saying in terms of the entrepreneur, remembering that gambling and the world of business has a great parallel, which is called the stock market. The stock market is basically a sophisticated form of gambling, because you don't know what the outcomes are. You base it upon education, but ultimately you don't know. So it is about looking for value. It's about looking for a win. It's about looking for the excitement of the stock that you win on, which motivates you to want to do it again. So not surprising, people who are in the business world, free-floating entrepreneurs and stockbrokers, have tons of ADHD, because they're able to take and withstand risk. And that's what gambling is all about. Handling risk. So so business and entrepreneurship is a very sophisticated and socially productive form of gambling, because we have essentially are wanting to make a big win.
That's a very valid point. That makes a lot of sense, where a lot of entrepreneurs are
risk takers.
Risk takers love entrepreneurship, because I never thought of it as a different form of gambling. And for the listeners here, the ADHD brain is prone to internet addiction, and we need to be aware of our usage and not get hooked. And just like Dr. Jain said, gambling and internet addiction are parallel. They're almost the same thing. And it's always looking for the brain activation to excitement. The go signal is too strong and hard to resist, and to create structure or systems around you to help navigate that. And, there is a correlation with anxiety and impulsivity. And the big message I got today is we got to control our impulsivity to reduce internet gambling addiction. Did I read that correctly?
So just to summarize the components of impulsivity that you can work on. Number one, if it wasn't there, you wouldn't be using it. In other words, get rid of whatever it is that causes you to be impulsive. If you didn't have money in your pocket, you wouldn't be spending it. If you didn't have a Visa card, you wouldn't be using it. If you weren't hanging around stupid people, you wouldn't get in trouble. If you didn't go to the casino, you probably wouldn't be in debt. Stay away from things that make the go signal strong. Get rid of them. Same with the internet. Get it off your phone. Like, eliminate things that all the games that you're playing, get them off your phone, because they obviously are distractions to you. Number two, you've got to make the no signal stronger. That could be medications, but that could also be people you trust that are over your shoulder, basically saying, don't do it. In other words, I often give my adolescent patients a statement that says, if there was a policeman standing at your elbow everywhere you went, would you get in trouble? No. Then why don't you imagine that everywhere you go? It doesn't have to be a police officer. It could be your spouse. It could be your boss. It could be people that you value. It could be your grandfather, frankly. That's even a better voice. If your grandfather was sitting right here and said, don't do it, I probably would listen to you. Number three, you have to find alternatives to the thing that makes you excitable. Obviously, you're being activated by the go signal, I want. Well, you better find a replacement to that feeling. And hopefully that replacement is something that is socially productive. So at the end of the day, if you're a gambler and you're excited by that feeling of winning, then you may need to find something alternative. Well, take up bungee jumping, for God's sake. Take up race car driving. Take up something that gives you take up skydiving, okay? You want to feel some excitement? Take up something that is socially productive, that gives you the same feeling. And if you felt that, why would you do gambling? So you got three options.
So we got to replace it. You can't just
either you replace it, stay away from it, or find a vehicle to make the signal that says, don't do it stronger. Those are your three choices. The ideal scenario is one of them can break it. All three of them, you nail it.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Jain. This is a great conversation. A lot of very good points, all related around internet and gambling addiction, and then also clarity on this impulsivity control, which I think is a big thing for a lot of listeners to contemplate on this. And for the listener, how is your internet usage? And is it for entertainment, or is it something you just can't get away from? And also consider if gambling is part of that aspect too. So thank you, Dr. Jain.
Happy to do it for you.
And to you, the listener, thanks for learning with me. Talk to you soon.